Local interest in the Liss Archaeological Group has grown rapidly over the past 3 years. We now have about 400 members. Professional archaeologist George Annolay has managed the archaeological activities on the site for the 3-year term of the project. So at last, everything is ready. The volunteers have been briefed and excavation work can at last commence. Last year's trench covering the Isle Barn complex has been reopened this year for further work. In addition to this, a new trench has been opened alongside the A3, giving a total of over 3,000 square metres to be explored this year. Several experienced trench supervisors will oversee the volunteer activities within this huge area. Ken Mordell will supervise the further excavation of the Isle Barn complex, which was uncovered last year. Work in this area will focus on the building at the western end of the Isle Barn. Last year we discovered walls within the building which were clearly later additions. They were simply butted against external walls. Inconsistent floor levels also suggested that the building was probably altered over time for possibly different purposes. A prime objective for 2007 was to unravel why and when these building changes were made. This Roman iron spearhead was discovered within the building. John Wildman supervised the excavation of the northern end of the new trench which was alongside the A3. The area includes the remains of a small Roman structure which was first discovered in 2005. The first job is to remove the membrane protecting the 2005 excavation. It was only partially excavated then and became known as the hovel because of its small size. Further work was planned for 2007 to try to fully interpret the building, its use and its date. A great deal of rubble had fallen in around the building. This needed to be carefully planned and recorded before being removed. Gradually the features of the building became better defined, and it became clear it had once had a hypercourse underfloor heating system. We have been fortunate to discover new Roman buildings in each of the previous 2 excavations. An exciting new discovery in 2007 was this tessellated floor, which was found just a few feet south of the heated building. To the northeast of the heated building, work centred on a series of ditches, many of which ran at right angles to each other. These ditches contain Iron Age and Roman pottery. We had found evidence of an Iron Age presence in previous digs on the site, and it seems possible that the occupants of the site had been there since at least Iron Age times and had simply adopted Roman ways of life after the Roman invasion in 43 AD. Meanwhile, great progress has been made on the so-called hovel, allowing reassessment of its purpose. The building has 2 small rooms, and the presence of different types of stone in the walls of each room hints that it had been modified over time. The building has a narrow tunnel at the western end, showing much evidence of heavy burning. This is consistent with this being a stoke hole for underfloor heating. The presence of a hypercourse is confirmed inside the building, where the floors clearly show burn marks in a square grid pattern. This dramatically shows where the floor support pillars, or pilae, once stood. Further work was also being done in the area of the tessellated floor. When discovered, the floor seemed isolated from any other archaeological feature, and so it was decided to dig an exploratory section adjacent to the floor itself. At a depth of about 1 metre, a semicircular wall was uncovered, which broadly matched the width of the tessellated floor. This was starting to look more and more like a plunge pool, and the dramatic discovery of a large piece of lead outlet pipe reinforced this theory. Here you can see the whole plunge pool building with its tessellated entrance. The pool could be drained via the lead pipe into a ditch. The adjacent building, which has hypercoarse heating, now looks highly likely to be the associated warm and sauna rooms of a bathhouse complex. So we need to stop calling it the hovel. Numerous post holes found in the area are also carefully mapped and excavated. Post holes normally contain a flat rock at the bottom of the pit. This was originally used as the base support for a wooden post. Above the flat rock, there are normally a jumble of large rocks and stones, which were originally used as packing material supporting the post. The southern end of the 2007 trench was supervised by Jonathan Dix. Jonathan's area was critical in helping us to understand the site better, as it linked all of the known buildings. That is, it linked the Isled Barn complex to the south, with the heated building being excavated by John Wildman's team to the north. Last year, part of an Iron Age ditch was discovered running underneath one of the Isled Barn buildings. This year's new trench revealed more of the ditch, and intriguingly it also revealed a second broadly parallel ditch line. A great number of suspected post holes were also found in the new trench. It was later ascertained that this ditch line was in fact a palisade, with a central square gateway into the villa courtyard. Artifact identification and recording is important, as it helps us to understand what the site was being used for and the dates it was occupied. Sherds of pottery, such as this fragment of Roland's Castle cooking pot and this piece of Alice Holt 4th century storage jar, help us to understand the date of the feature and the residents' local supply routes and preferences. Exploratory sections were cut across the ditches, and many post holes were excavated and recorded. Here you can clearly see 2 lines of ditch sections and post holes that were dug in Jonathan's area. This large circular feature was also investigated. It turned out to be yet another well, the third discovered so far on the site. Wells will often contain some of the nicest finds and can provide much information about the way of life and beliefs of the time. Last year's discovery of the skeleton of Brutus the dog in our first well generated a staggering amount of interest. Brutus was front-page news in the local press, and his discovery has appeared on internet sites as far away as New York and Canada. The first well was securely sealed at the end of last year's dig, so that we could resume our excavation of it this year. To allow us easier, safer access to the well, we cut a sloping ramp into the hillside. This inevitably knocked some soil into the well shaft, but within a day we had exposed the stone lining of the well shaft again. The next step was to plan and install the shoring so that we could continue our excavation. Several tons of sturdy timber beams and boards had been purchased specifically for the well shoring. Our archaeological director, John Brown, is an experienced archaeologist who has recently planned and supervised the excavation of several wells at Silchester Roman town site. The shoring was placed inside the well shaft with the aim of not disturbing the stone lining of the well. Thick boards around the side of the shoring could be individually raised and lowered as required. Peter Page's turn to dig, complete with Davy lamp and canary, safety at work and all that. It's a very tight space to work in and definitely not a place for the claustrophobic. Spoil is brought to the surface manually, half a bucket at a time, and slowly but surely a depth of almost 5 meters was reached. Unfortunately, the shape of the shaft was uneven. It was oval rather than circular, where centuries of subsidence had moved the sides. Worst of all, in some places there were overhanging walls, where unmortared rock had been pushed inwards. For safety reasons, the overhanging wall was recorded and removed. This removal created a safe, larger area to work in. Water started seeping slowly into the well at a depth of about 3 meters. By the time we had got to 5 meters, we were able for the first time in 1600 years to fetch a bucket full of water out of the well. Our insurance conditions required that we did not exceed a depth of 5 meters, so reluctantly work stopped on the well when we reached that depth. Probably the most critical part of archaeological excavation is the painstaking recording and planning required. Details of individual contexts are accurately recorded. From these records, archaeologists now and in the future are able to assess not just the individual small features, but also the site as a whole. One of the more energetic activities on site includes sieving spoil for smaller pieces of bone, glass, pottery and building materials. All finds are channeled into the finds processing team. Each year they assess, clean, identify and catalogue many thousands of pieces of building material, pottery, glass, stone, metalwork, bones and carved items. In fact, everything that the excavators have placed in their finds tray. Each tray has a context number associated with it, which identifies precisely where the finds were excavated. It is the finds processing team's job to manage the correct classification and stories of the tons of objects which are discovered each year. Each piece of pottery and building material is painstakingly labelled with information detailing its origin on site and the year in which it was found. One of the most unusual finds going through the finds processing this year was this hefty section of Roman lead piping. This pipe was found in the wall of the coal plunge pool and was the means by which the pool was drained by the Romano British, some blowhole. Much painted plaster was also discovered in the residential building next to the aisled barn. This tile, containing the imprint of a dog's paw, was a popular favourite in the exhibition centre. Who knows, perhaps it was Brutus. Experts, such as Kate Brown, attended the site to give professional analyses of our finds. This beautifully napped arrowhead was found in the wall of one of the Romano British buildings. It is thought to date to the early Bronze Age. Amongst the items pouring into the find centre were several pieces of natural fossil, including sea urchins, attesting to the undersea prehistoric origins of the area. Responsible and controlled metal detecting can help archaeologists to locate the smallest metallic items in context. It is very easy to miss small objects during purely manual excavation. Obviously, it is better if such items are found in context on the dig site. But detectors can also be used to retrieve interesting items which have ended up on the spoil heaps. This is a hit on a recently moved spoil heap from last year. This turned out to be an Edinburgh halfpenny token coin, dated 1792. It was given as small change by Edinburgh tradesmen, essentially a credit note against future purchases. How it came to be buried in a Liss field is anyone's guess. A new feature for 2007 was the environmental sample processing tank, made by the fair hand of our archaeological director. Soil samples from archaeological features can be processed to provide detailed information about the nature of climate, the crops, the food, etc. in its historical context. Samples are washed within the tank to remove fine silt and soil. Anything that floats, such as some seeds, snail shells, charcoal and wood, is collected in the fine wire mesh underneath the overflow funnel. The mesh inside the tank will contain the clean larger particles, which will include some stones and grit, but also tiny animal, bird and fish bones, and pieces of shell, etc. Analysis of both the flotsam and jetsam can therefore provide additional information about climate, local conditions and diet. This archaeological group takes great pride in providing a full educational experience for the children. Many local schools visit the site each year, and apart from touring the site, they take part in numerous educational activities. The children are given an introductory talk about the site and a bit of the history about the Roman occupation. This is followed by a guided tour of the site and the kiln with a short talk about its construction and firing of pots. Other activities for the children included a dig in the practice trench, the use of a metal detector, digging of test pits and washing finds. They were given the chance of experiencing most of the various facets of the dig. This year alone, over 300 school children attended the site on educational visits. A major addition this year was a porter cabin, which was used as a combined exhibition centre, visitor centre and shop, and was much praised by the visitors. The exhibition provided a great deal of information about the group, the site and our findings. A representative sample of artefacts found on the villa site were on display, many in a way in which encouraged the visitors to closely inspect and even touch them. The vast majority of items on display had been found on the Roman villa site. The few that had not were found within 2 miles of the villa. In this way, the relatively small area of the exhibition was able to feature a wide spread of very local artifacts representing all historical periods from 250,000 years BC to the current date. The reproduction Romano British kiln was constructed using local clay in 2005 and has been fired at least twice every year since. Local potters and pottery experts have used the kiln to experiment in Roman pottery making techniques. The first pottery firing this year seems to have attracted the attention of the local fire brigade. Fortunately, the fire engine went straight past the site. Jack Langley looks after the overnight firings. The aim is to achieve a temperature of 1100 degrees centigrade around the pots in the kiln. It takes several hours for the kiln to cool enough to remove the pots. Once again, a successful firing has been achieved. Archaeological specialists attend the site each year, and in addition to providing expert advice, they present talks to the volunteer diggers. Dr. David Sim is an experimental archaeologist specialising in armour and weaponry.